Hello everybody, welcome back. You can tell what time it is, headphones are on, which means I got another guest in today. Rob is back, the girthiest of demons, back from the depths of darkest America, wherever he is from. Say hi, Rob.
What's up? Definitely darkest America. It's New Jersey.
Definitely, there we go. The newest of jerseys, not to be confused with the old jersey that we have here. We're going to be talking about the Kruleboyz Monsta Killaz warband. We will go through the entire warband. We'll go through all the fighters. We'll do some list building with them. We'll look at allies, everything and anything you want to know. We should be able to cover it. Before we start, as always, if you want to offer some more support to me and everything that we're doing over here at Off Meta Musings, if you wanted to give us a like and subscribe, that would be very well appreciated. Alternatively, I do have, you can see it down there in the links below, you can join the channel for membership on YouTube. You can join over on Patreon if you want to see some behind the scenes action and have a little bit of a say into the kind of content that I produce in the future. Or alternatively, if that's not for you, you can check out Streamlabs and you can give some support that way. Talking about Patreon today, I would like to give a very big welcome to Mole Mannequin and Beard Crumbs, my two latest Patreons. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you very much for giving me your continued support. But yes, without further ado, let's get going. Let's talk about the Kruleboyz. To start with, we are going to, as always, be talking about the Monsta Killaz reaction, Cruel Trap. So it reads, after enemy fighter within 6 inches of this fighter ends a move action, you get to roll a dice. On a roll of 5 or more, you get to pick one of 2 effects. Either that fighter can't make move actions for the rest of the battle round, so it's a net in effect, or you can allocate 4 damage points to that enemy fighter. Now, if you don't manage to roll your 5+, you roll a 1 to 4, what you're going to be doing is 2 damage points. This is the range of Cruel Trap from one model in the center of a normal size Warcry board. I haven't cut anything down here. This is exactly how big it is. So the radius is huge. Rob, you're probably in a better position to talk about this than I am because you've been doing a lot of testing with the Monsta Killaz recently.
When they came out in October, I put a disgusting amount of like 15 games in 1 week. So the one thing I realized about Cruel Trap and the way to look at it is I don't like most gambling abilities where it's like roll a die and then if it's this or this, do this. If it's this or this, do that. I don't like that. However, at minimum, the way to look at this is a 2 damage point tax for someone moving in your radius. And since the Monsta Killaz don't have a lot of durability or high HP, this lets you chip and chew down quickly. Now, what it's really good for is the mind games it plays. You have a 3-move model like an Annihilator Prime, a Warden King, Iron Jaws unit, right? They're not getting to you in one fell swoop. So they have to risk and gamble, all right, I'm going to move. You roll that 5 up and you net them, that completely changes the dynamic of it. Or even better, if they're coming in and they're already engaged and you know that it might be on an egg rot, right? Which we'll talk about later. But they move in, they make engaged. I'm going to roll that dice anyway because it's either 2 damage for coming to me or 4 damage to coming right at me. You're trying to move through my zone, it's a net possibly. So there's a lot of mind games that it plays and there's a lot of good free chip damage. It's not free, it's a reaction, but it's through armor. And it's going to sit. It's pretty interesting when to use it, and it covers a high skill cap for it.
Yeah, and I think, like, if we're talking about Klutcha-Grots specifically, I think they're cheap enough to kind of use as reaction batteries in this case, because they're cheap and you can just plonk them on a piece of terrain or whatever. And because the radius is so huge, you could basically have the entire board covered by just 4 models.
It's really a really good point to say the Klutcha-Grots would be a reaction battery. They are terribly bad chaff in a generic sense, but you're going to sit them there. You're going to sit them behind a piece of terrain. You're going to make them annoying, and they serve as like this horrific speed bump for people to come up. And that more often than not, or a lot of people gun right for them. You want to kill the 60-point model, waste an entire turn, go for it.
I think it's kind of, it's almost better to look at this reaction, especially with Klutcha-Grots in mind, right? As more of, let's say, a ranged attack. If you think of it as a ranged attack, most fighters with ranged attacks, generally speaking, those attacks are so poor that they are not going to do 2 damage to their opponent if they hit them. But what you've got here is you're using an action just like you would an attack action, and you're either going to do 2 or 4 damage points, which is pretty good. It's basically like having an attack that does 2-4 but always crits on 5s. When you're thinking about it in that way, or you're going to net, thinking about the ability on the Grots more as this range disruption piece, as opposed to a thing that you've got to say, oh, I'm using my reaction to do something. I think that might be a way to go, because you can always sit your Klutcha-Grots behind your main fighters, and then just using it by going, okay, I've got my Klutcha-Grot here, but my Klutcha-Grot doesn't really matter. What I'm doing, in effect, is giving my main fighter an extra 2 or 4 damage before it's even swung for an attack.
That's exactly right. And that's what I often end up doing. Either I'll put it forward and present it like good luck moving through here, or I'll tuck it behind and just be like, okay, try to come through. It's very interesting. You hit the nail on the head with that one. And again, it's the interesting part of I'm able to react with you on your turn and able to do things on your turn, which is what I really like in a playstyle.
I think it's interesting you bring up the Annihilators, because basic Annihilators only have those 20 wounds. And going from 20 wounds down to 16 wounds, 16 wounds is a lot easier to deal with than 20 wounds. And you're basically doing it for free. Like, the Grot is going to sit there anyway. He's going to sit on your objective. So you might as well just throw the dice at him.
At very worst, it's 2. He's going down to 18. If he comes in and goes to try to counter or anything else, like, you got it. It's just free damage, something that's going to be a threat.
Yes. I do want to remind people that you can only react once to an enemy action. So you can't lay down this minefield of cruel traps and roll a bunch of dice at your opponent. But I think even outside of that, your opponent's going to have multiple fighters that they're going to be moving, and 6 inches is just big enough, really.
Right. And also you give up, the fact you're giving up a action to stay still to try and do something is another thing. So you have to weigh that risk reward. Do I need to be in position? There's a lot of movement and a lot of things you have to consider. Everyone here's for movement except for the monkey, so you're not getting a super fast warband. So you have to gauge, where do I have to be specifically if you're on a objective mission or anything like that.
Going into the fighters themselves, we're going to start with the best fighter. Suddenly has popped up in a lot of destruction lists as an ally. The Beastnob, he's fantastic. You can see it just from his stat line. The 4-6-3-5 damage profile is pretty huge. He's got 25 wounds, which isn't something that you often see for a 200-point hero. He's got the toughness 4, which makes him just survivable enough. And he's got a bunch of really good abilities to go with him, along with that ranged attack that most of the fighters in this warband have. Normally, it seems like that ranged attack would push the points up significantly of any one of the fighters it was given to. You can take a look at the Wilder Corpse Hunters, for example. They all have a ranged attack, and they're kind of paying this tax for that, but it seems like the Beastnob managed to avoid that tax at all. And I'm not entirely sure how.
It's kind of wild. And it's not the most terrific profile for the ranged. It is something that has come up, though. Say he gets netted, well, I still got 8 inches to throw, just get some more chip damage on him. It's just like a nice little cherry on top without getting taxed on points, because his 200 points, I mean, for a bespoke leader, what he's bringing to the table is actually insane.
He has a bunch of abilities. Some of them are common to the Monster Killaz themselves, and he has one ability that is unique to him. That ability is Cruel Taunt, where on a double you get to pick a fighter within a number of inches equal to the value of the ability. And then until the end of the battle round, you get to subtract 2 damage points by each hit and critical hit from attack actions made by that fighter, unless those actions target this fighter. So unless they target the Beastnob, the fighter that you pick is basically going to be -2/-2. That's, I think it's the only ability of its kind in Warcry where it's a taunt that says, okay, you have to attack me or else do X. And because of that, and I think because of the inherent toughnesses of the Beastnob, having those 25 wounds, having that toughness 4, which is decent, the really good melee damage profile on top of that, I think it makes it super effective. And especially on those fighters that might not have a massive crit profile, Cruel Taunt can basically push that damage into the ground and make that fighter not do anything unless they're fighting the Beastnob.
Yeah, this is where the faction gets really interesting. They essentially have a utility belt of really niche options to do things with their dice. And Cruel Taunt stripping people, if they're 3/5, they're going down to 1/3.
Mhm.
You're stripping a lot of damage for survivability on a warband that inherently doesn't have it. Now, is this really an awesome ability? Yeah. Putting stuff up for survivability, right?
Mhm.
Huge. It is definitely, it's only one of its kind. It is a niche ability, but it has such amazing application. And I think because of it, the Beastnob wants to become a recipient of getting +1T for 20 points for
Yeah.
Divine Blessing. That's the only thing I haven't really tested too much on him, because the points go to another fighter, which we'll cover.
Yeah.
But it definitely is an interesting ability, and it judges the pilot's ability to make decisions of, am I going to forego a high double or a decent double to reduce damage, or am I going to use a double elsewhere to increase my damage?
Cruel Taunt only requires you to pick an enemy fighter, not a visible enemy fighter. So on some of those denser boards, maybe some of the more original Warcry terrain where you had like the big blocky walls that you couldn't see through, Cruel Taunt suddenly being able to affect people on the other side of walls without needing to see them is again something that adds very nicely to that utility. He also has access to Cruel Stabbing and Nasty Mugging. These are two Monster Hunter specific abilities themselves, so anyone in the warband can use them. Cruel Stabbing is until the end of the fighter's activation, you add 1 to the damage points from each hit and critical hit from melee attack actions made by this fighter that target an enemy fighter that's had 5 or more damage points allocated to them. I've done the maths on this, and most of the time you're going to be wanting to use Onslaught just because of the Beastnob's base stats. His stats are high enough that with an extra attack, that one additional attack will more or less be hitting on 3s most of the time. And if it's hitting on 3s, it's either going to do 3 or 5 damage. There are some very niche applications of Cruel Stabbing, but otherwise just use Onslaught.
The one thing that is funny about this, right? And you could see the design space is like, oh, people move, they take damage from your reactions, and then they move in, and all of a sudden you're beefing your attacks up. Like, that was the clear-cut intention to design this. I do think, point of note, yes, Onslaught is 99% of the time better. However, if you are going against the True Blades, the Asgardian True Blades, if you do a Cruel Stabbing, you're 5 points cheaper than an Exemplar, and you'll have the same damage profile with an extra dice.
And finally, we have Nasty Muggin. It's the faction quad. You get to pick an enemy fighter within 1 inch of this fighter. Each friendly fighter with the Kruleboyz Monsta Killaz rune mark within 3 inches of that fighter can make 1 bonus attack action that must target that enemy fighter. We always like to compare quads with Rampage. Rampage, now it took a little bit of a hit earlier on in the year, whereby you're only going to be moving up to the value of the dice. Nasty Muggin is each friendly fighter within range of that enemy fighter. So the Beastnob still gets a free attack action, which is really good with Nasty Muggin. But what it does give is it gives everyone near you bonus attack actions. So I think this is one of those rare examples of an ability where if you don't need to move, or you roll a pretty low quad, let's say you roll a quad 1 or a quad 2, where the extra movement on Rampage isn't going to be all that impactful, I think Nasty Muggin definitely has space to be used.
Yeah, it fits the whole theme of these like niche abilities that are really good, because the enemy fighter just has to be within 1 inch of the Beastnob, and then the Beastnob has to.
But it could be any fighter because everybody's got Nasty Muggin.
So whoever's doing has to be within the initial inch. But it's awesome because your harpoons have 3 inches on their melee, or 0 to 8. But then you also have the bone hacka, which is 2 inches. So you have a lot of flexibility for things to not be engaged and still get in there. I have myself personally yet to use it, but I'm very excited for the time I do. Really cool. It's thematic, and it shows that these new bespoke bands are moving in a really great design territory.
They are, most definitely. I think the recent 4 warbands have been very good in the way that they're designed, getting to do different things in a different way to other warbands. I think Games Workshop has been doing a good job in that regard. One quick thing about the Beastnob's damage. Most of the time he's going to be hitting on 3s. He's going to be doing average 9.3 damage, which is huge. We were talking about the reaction doing 2 damage or 4 damage on the way in. So if we go back to our Annihilator example, where he's only going to be wounding on 4s, 2 attacks off of the Beastnob is average 14 damage, plus 2 or 4 damage from the reaction. That's very close to a dead Annihilator.
The fact that they could stand up and throw dice against some of the bigger boys, they're not going to stand up to Titan models. But the fact that they can go up to a Titan model that's already activated and usually hit on 3s against Tyrants or 3s against most Ogres, with exception to the Myrmidon and the Fomo Crusher and stuff like that. But if there's already a lot of chip damage, you're throwing 4, 8 dice, whatever it might be, you're hitting pretty hard. And then you have the chance to punch way above your weight for what something is in toughness. So it's good.
Well, I mean, anything that can bracket a Chimera is good in my book.
Heroes, right. Unless you get Dragon Mauled immediately.
But you know what? With the reaction, I don't want to say a decent chance. There's a chance that the monster could land and then go, oh, I can't move anymore. That's a shame. At least you have nets built in to the warband where you don't need to bring them in from like a Boggle Eye or something like that.
Right. That's the coolest part is you don't need to ally anything in for that. You just need to measure who's going to make this. It's not a guaranteed chance, but the fact that it can happen from anyone's pretty cool.
Sure. Next up, we have the Monkey, the Nullwood Howler. Super simple. 125 points, 5-3-2-4 damage profile, which I like. It's got a lot of attacks. Yes, it can get countered, but it can get countered. That's just the way it is. Movement 6, so it's a bit faster than your basic Kruleboyz in the warband. Toughness 3, which I can give or take. It doesn't really bother me. 18 wounds, I find is quite nice for a model of this size. It's got decent enough damage that it can do 5.24 average weighted damage. It's also still fairly points efficient with a points per wound of 23. So we're looking at in the top third of all the fighters in the game in terms of its damage efficiency. But yeah, I like it. It's a beast, which sucks. It doesn't get access to a bunch of abilities, but it's fine. As a model, I think it's fine.
I'm going to be real with you. I don't even have them built, right?
Yeah.
I hated the model. I didn't want to play them. I thought they looked absolutely horrific. I don't like monkeys. I don't like baboons. Gorillas are cool, but I don't like any of that stuff. Orangutans are gross. Chimps are gross. Hated them seeing them at the zoo when I was little. Just didn't care for them. They were just weird to me. And I'm like, I'm never going to play him. And after talking to the Salty Sea, he was running like a fun list with 4 of them in there. I put 1 in my list to see how they perform. I'll tell you what, having the 18 wounds on something that's 6 speed is really awesome. And typically what I use them for is a late deployment. If I'm looking at a mission pack to set them up, come off the edge and fly and interrupt a range piece. Arbalesters, Pock, all those guys, I just throw them right out there and make them stick on because they can never get away. They're surprisingly great for 125. The 5 dice sells me on it. I don't care if you're going to counter me. Waste your actions. I'm going to make sure I waste your range players or a support piece. I'm going to do whatever I can to tie up whatever it is. It's surprisingly excellent. I take 1 now. If I slide the points, I take 1 usually just to kind of counter whatever I can. Or if not, they're great for just flying across the map and taking a point. If you want to live in magical Christmas land, if you roll 5 crits on them,
it's a lot of damage.
5 crits, you're done.
We've got the Neckslicers. There are a bunch of different options for Neckslicers. I say a bunch. There are 3 different options for Neckslicers. One with Bone Hacker, one with Harpoon, and one with Smasher. They go up 110, 115, 120 points. They all have the same defensive profile, so we are looking at all movement 4, all toughness 3, all 15 wounds. They're a little bit on the pricey side, but I think offensively is where they really shine. The Bone Hacker is 2-inch range, 3-5-2-4, so not a terrible damage profile. The Harpoon, again, 3-inch range, 2-4-2-5, but the Harpoon has a special ability that we're going to look at which really helps boost the numbers that it can put down. And then we've got the Smasher, which is just a standard 4-4-2-4 real solid melee profile, again on the cheaper end of the spectrum when compared to things like the Harpoon and the Bone Hacker. They all have access to Cruel Stabbing. The Harpoon has access to Rip It Out, so after the next attack action that has the spear or range weapon remark made by this fighter in this activation, if it scored 1 or more hits, you allocate a number of damage points to the target of that attack equal to the value of this ability. So it's real good. You roll a high enough double, all you need to do is hit with any of your 2 attacks, and at strength 4, you've got a decent enough chance of doing it, and you can get anywhere from 1 to 6 extra damage.
Oh man, let me tell you about Rip It Out. This whole this is like also the awesome design space. You know, take a shot if I keep saying it right. Take a drink. The design space of this warband is just so phenomenal and like thematic with like being on a hunt or fighting dirty on a hunt. These guys are mid-range priced fighters and they're really expensive. It kind of hurts you in the list building space because I think I was so disappointed because like I love the look of these models and I just wanted to spam them because they're so cool, but you can't. And that's just the reality we live in, and that's okay because Beastnob's great. They have a great suite of allies. So going back to Rip It Out, it's a gamble, but a Rip It Out on a 5 or 6, if you hit and miss, you still get it, that's going to be 8 damage. That's enough to chunk something down to be like, hey, watch where you're moving, because if you move again near me, I'm going to react. I might be able to kill you with a react. And it is a phenomenal ability. And again, a little bit of a gamble. This requires a lot of precise calculation in terms of risk reward, but it can absolutely chew up chaff. It can chew up a lot of anything that's running a 3T. I've been using points to bump it up to 5 toughness, so I'm hitting most things on 3. So I'm giving myself a greater game.
5 strength.
5 strength. I'm sorry. My apologies. Thank you.
That's all right.
I also have whiff 2 with it, and that's just the nature of the game, playing a dice game. But more often than not, this absolutely just ruins things. I can't speak high enough about Rip It Out, though. It has done so much work in just removing objects.
I mean, I think making it strength 5 is a really good idea because of the way that Rip It Out is worded, and because of that FAQ in January of 2023, if you're watching this later on, that differentiates between hits and crits. You want to be hitting on 3 so that you almost don't want to crit. That's the thing. Because if you crit, Rip It Out doesn't work, but you need just a normal hit. At a strength 5 harpoon, and you're going to be winning on 3s most of the times, it actually gives you a 50% chance for Rip It Out to work. And I think when it does so, I think it's really useful and really good. In the case of the Bone Hacker also has its own ability called Soar 'em Up. It's on a triple. You pick a visible enemy fighter within 2 inches of this fighter, and then you roll a number of dice equal to the value of this ability to a minimum of 2. If you can make a group of 2 or more dice in consecutive numerical order, for example, a 2, 3, or 4, excluding any duplicates, you allocate 3 damage points to the chosen fighter for each dice in that group. So let's say, for example, we'll use their example. You roll a triple 6, you roll your dice, and then you roll a 2, 3, and 4 consecutively. That's one group with 3 dice that are consecutive. You're going to do 3 damage per dice. So you're going to do 9 damage off that roll, which is really good. Now, the problem with this ability is that it's worded terribly. You can see it in this box here. There are basically 2 interpretations. One interpretation is where you're only allowed to make one group of dice, regardless of how many consecutive dice you roll. So let's give an example. You roll your 6 dice. If you roll a 1 and a 2, that's a group of 2 consecutive dice. But if you also roll a 4, 5, and a 6, that's another group of consecutive dice. So are you able to say, okay, I have 2 groups of dice, each group is going to do 3 damage, or do you just have to pick one group? Because of the wording of the ability, it can basically be ruled either way. I think if you only had to pick one group of dice, I think the ability would generally be too weak. But because if you could pick 2 or more groups of dice, I think that the ability is very strong. So it needs an errata. There's probably some middle ground there where the ability is just right. But it's a great ability as it's written, let's say.
Yeah, it's the ultimate like endorphin like rush, slot machine, go wild. This is Warcry. Welcome. I think I've been running it when I was running it as make 2 groups. It's too consistently way too strong. And running it, so I've been running it as one group, and I think the middle ground is you can make like if you roll like a 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you make a group of 1 to 2, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You would select a group, just one group, and that seems to be the fair. It needs a high value triple, like 6 preferably, to get the most out of it, but 5 has seemed to work. It is a really nasty nuke if you can do it. And against things like Stormcast, against things with higher toughness, I have thrown it, and like getting 9 to 12 damage is just amazing. And we talked about that Annihilator because they're such a common order piece, right? 20 wounds. Well, it took 2, then it took 4. So it's down to, it's down to 14. And all of a sudden you're hitting him for 9. It's a really great nuke ability from 2 inches away. Saw him up is probably one of the most fun abilities. And then you get this, like, I saw the dude up. Like, you just have to guy up. It's awesome, dude. It's so cool. It fits them on theme. Like, it's great. But it definitely needs that fact. And it is definitely a big gamble because, like, what if you roll a 666, right?
Between Rip It Out, Saw 'em Up, the reaction, Cruel Stabbing, all of these abilities, Nasty Mug, and even like basically every action that you see here plus the reaction, it's all force multipliers. So your opponent looks at your miniatures and they go, oh, well, he's 4-3, 15 wounds. He's got 3-5, 2-4 damage profile. I can beat that. That's fine. But on the way in, you're going to be taking damage from the reaction. You're going to be shot by the harpoons who are going to be doing extra damage. And then when you get there, you're going to be sawed up and all the rest of your boys are going to be attacking it as well. So they've got a lot of force multipliers. Neckslicers themselves are fairly expensive. Considering the abilities that they get, I actually think they're very fairly costed.
Yeah.
Because they have all that extra damage kind of baked into their cost. Whereas you see it in some other warbands where fighters are basically costed based on their stats and nothing else. With the Monster Killaz, apart from probably the Beastnob, who I think is undercosted maybe by 5 or 10 points or something, I think overall it's a very fair warband in terms of the points you're paying for the output that you're getting. I think especially in the last 4 releases, so the Gorger Moorpack, Wild Corpse, these guys, and the Fire Dwarves, I've said this before, I think Games Workshop did a real good job in balance between these factions.
It's probably a talk for a different video, but I absolutely 1000% agree with you that I think where they're moving and where they're pricing and pointing things makes complete sense. After you open any of these boxes, play them as a box, it feels not bad. It feels like it makes like, oh, this is pointed because we have some decent stats and some good abilities. I love it, and I think where they're heading in terms of that is excellent as long as they keep this up. Not so long ago, we had Gur boxes. I know you're a big Hunters of Wanchi guy, but that was a tough nut to crack. You also have to have like 8 million claws.
You do, yeah.
Rotmeyer's not bad. It's a pretty good...
Rotmeyer good. I think Heart of Gur is probably the best balanced box out of that set because you got Horza Husha and you got Rotmeyer Creed. The rest of the boxes were kind of really swingy. So some war bands would be really good in certain missions where the other one would be really good in other missions, and there's no real common ground if you wanted to play an out of the box experience. But yeah, I think these new ones super good.
They're definitely listening. They definitely made a step up in improvement. These have been played. We just need to teach the English company how to write in English so we can how to get a good fact. I mean, don't even point at us. Or New Jersey doesn't even speak English.
You guys speak American, right? That's just a language unto
American.
itself.
American. It's apostrophe American.
Yeah, apostrophe America. Moving on, we have more guys because we're not done yet, and we got the BrawlaBoys. BrawlaBoy with Stabber and one with Flogger. They have their own ability, Drum and Holler, on a triple. Enemy fighters within 6 inches of this fighter cannot make reactions, which I think is shared between 1 or 2 other fighters in the game. There aren't many instances of this action, but it's nice depending on who you're coming up against. So if you're fighting something like a very reaction heavy warband, like Hunters of Wanchi, for example, that really relies on their reaction to get out of there and to do things, the BrawlaBoy is great. Whether you would want to actually take one in a general pickup game setting, that's really for you to decide. They're not expensive. Their damage profiles are okay. The Stabber is 4-4-2-3. The Flogger has 3-inch range, which I'm always a fan of. 5-3-1-4. So again, those 5 attacks, kind of like the Baboon, that can definitely do things. Overall, they're fine, really, but they're very niche.
Right. Open up that utility belt again, because that niche Drum and Holler is probably useless 4 out of 5 games, but for the time you go against OBR, you go against Hunters of Wanchi, you go against even new Castellites that want to counter using the reaction, and all of a sudden you say, you can't make reactions, you're fighting on our terms. It's pretty great then. It's not a bad unit for 110, and like you mentioned, I play exclusively with the Flogger, 3-inch range, throwing 5 dice. I'm going to fish. I either target somebody who hasn't activated, or I target a little chaff that I know he wants to move and may want to counter because it's 5 dice. You're vulnerable to counter. But hell, being able to swing over people with 3 inches behind my Beastnob, behind an Ardboy boss, it's awesome. They're really good for 110. Great piece. I recommend building the Flaga if you get 1 box. If you get 2 boxes, 1 of each is completely fine. But 3-inch range and crit fish sometimes just does it.
The real cool thing about the Flogger is it actually works really well with your quad. Because if it is going to stick to your Beastnob or stick to something else, and you do manage to get that quad, you're throwing 5 dice at a thing, you got decent chances of doing some nice damage. You can see here the average weighted damage, you're looking between 4 and 5 damage, and that's not bad for an attack action for anyone.
No, not at all. I'm a big fan of it.
Lastly, we have the Klutcha-Grot. We've been talking about it already. 60 points. It's got cruel stabbing, nasty mugging, like the rest of them. It does not have good melee profiles. The 3-2, though it does have the 2-3 damage, which I'm a fan of. Movement 4, toughness 4, which is okay. 6 wounds, but as we've been saying all throughout this thing, use it as a reaction battery, use it to sit on objectives, use it to sit behind your other fighters to add disruption for that reaction. And I think it's cheap enough and almost survivable enough with that toughness 4 that it'll do what it needs to do.
I got one word. MVP. last TTS league for November, it was a restricted list building league. They're the most annoying units in the world. Do I really waste my time on this? Think about the overkill scenarios of how much damage is overkilling or blowing this thing out from like a Vulcan Runefather, from a Gorger, from anything like that. And all they're sitting there doing is reacting. I think against Phylax, who actually just won Warhammer World, if I'm correct.
Yes.
Demetrios in the league, I played him. He moved in, netted his prime on a 5-up. Okay, his one dude's just chilling there. He can't do anything else, right? I don't even go near him. I don't give him the option to attack. Next time he moves in, he takes 4 damage. Then I counter. He takes another 4 damage. So I've done 8 damage. I mean, this thing got absolutely exploded.
Oh, sure.
But like, your 200 points, 180 points of whatever is killing 60 points that got netted for a turn, and then all of a sudden just took 8 points through your T6. Does it feel good that you wasted everything, a big kill target on 60 points? These guys are just roadblocks. They're bumps. I use them to block out and keep my harpoons safe, or I use them in the back to just limit where you're going. When I deploy them off the board edge, I have one group that I deployed with a monkey. I literally just deployed it where if like anybody was moving through or around, they risk dealing with that. So it's either take a turn away from what they were going to do, focus this through, or risk going through it. And yeah, more than often than not, you're going to move through unimpeded. But what if you don't? That's where the mind games comes in, or you're just taking 2 damage on your arrival to where you wanted to go. They're awesome, dude. I absolutely 100% love them. I think I run 2 in most of my lists. I wouldn't run more. There's only 1 a box, which is really unfortunate. Since this whole warband doesn't have chaff, these are the closest thing to it, and I absolutely love them for a reaction battery.
I think placing with the monkey is actually a really good idea because it gives protection. Because the monkey only has toughness 3, right? So anything big enough that wants to run in and hit the monkey can kill it. It's got 18 wounds, but that's not going to last forever. But having a Klutcha-Grot next to it, adding that reaction, so the possibility of netting the thing or putting a little bit of extra damage in to allow the monkey an easier time to kill whatever it is that's charged it, I think is a really, really solid play.
Yeah, I thank you. I absolutely agree, and that's what I've pretty much been doing for. Very rarely did I split it, but if I do split it out, it's with the intent of just causing disruption wherever it goes. And yet again, if you want to spend a turn removing a 60-point model, sure, I don't care.
Yeah. Exactly. Moving into allies, I've got the normal destruction suite of allies here. We've got the brute boss with chopper if you wanted something to go take objectives. We got the clawback if you wanted something fast that will go and just blitz through things. An amazing damage profile there, and it's got the bounding leaps that allows it to get places much more quickly. We got things like the Brugit, which can throw its buff onto anything it wants, probably the brute boss, the clawback, or your Beastnob if that's what you're taking. I do think that destruction are very much spoiled for choice when it comes to allies. They basically have something for everything. And I think if you wanted to play a Grand Alliance that does give you that ally toolbox, Destruction is basically where you want to be. Just having all of these different abilities and different fighters for different things is a real boost for Destruction. And similarly for the Kruleboyz Monsta Killaz, you can bring anything to complement your playstyle.
It's an embarrassment of riches, right? Like, we have everything that we can pick from and then some to fill out our roles and ranks. It really feels really good to be like, I need to pick this brute boss. I need to have power projection in a clawback or a bolt boy boss. I need to have a big ranged piece like Rothgorn into certain comps. It's wild. There's such a good amount. Ardboy boss is another one. Mega boss is another one. There's anything and everything. Whatever you want, it will spoil you and handicap you, because when I've gone to other list building for like Death and Order and Chaos, you realize the flexibility of those factions is not as prevalent. Order a little more flexible than the other two, but it's really made me be like, well, why would I pick anything else when I could just pick whatever I want?
With that in mind, we have a list here for you. I call this just good stuff Monsta Killaz because that's basically what it is. It kind of uses the best aspects of Monsta Killaz along with some of the best allies available to them to build, I would say, just an all-comers, all-round list that will generally be able to perform in most missions that we're going to be looking at. So we got the Beastnob because the Beastnob is Beastnob's Beast. We got the Brute Boss with Boss Chopper in case we want to do things against warbands like Soulblight Gravelords on objective missions. We got the Ardboy Boss with Ardboy Choppers for just a solid 135 point damaging piece. A couple of Neckslicers with Bone Hacker and Harpoon, so that will allow you to pick and choose between the two abilities depending on what it is you're fighting against. We've got the BrawlaBoy, 110 points, like we said already. In the event that you are playing a reaction-heavy warband, you do have it to be able to turn off those reactions. And then finally, we have the two Klutcha-Grots to act as reaction batteries.
This was made when I was trying to figure out, which I was a little frustrated trying to figure them out. They weren't playing like how I wanted them to play. I had to kind of figure out they need either an intense amount of projection or they need anvils. They had no anvils. They're not really tanky. Cruel Taunt's awesome, but it's dice related and it's going to be situational at best. Having a brute boss to have 30 wounds, 5 toughness, go in the middle, take an objective, sit down, or just run at something crazily, it helps a lot with dealing with that. And then the Beastnob's its own other threat. And then you have the Ardboy boss, which is like a selective blender. A lot of people think it's going to be a tank. I do think that in here, having yet again a source of WOG to speed your dudes up is also awesome. You have 2 sources of that, and you have the ability to have charge and commit a little bit more pressure off that. It's really strong. It's been a pretty successful list in terms of like raw fighting. And then by the time that your brute boss, Ardboy boss, Beastnob are tied up or in the thick, it lets your Hakas and your Harpoon and the BrawlaBoy just kind of get into position to kind of do what they want to do. Klutcha-Grot's kind of protect where everybody's moving behind or around them with their reaction. It's a pretty solid list. It's fun. Very, very mentally taxing to play. You have to be thinking about a lot of where you're going. All your Monsta Kills are squishy. The only thing that's really tough here is the brute boss. So you have to think where and how you want to pick your engagements. So it's kind of like you're playing with this hunting crew that wants to be tricky. You can't just sit there and aggro straight into everything, because then you're going to block yourself off and lock yourself out of things. And as good as the brute boss is with 6 strength, he might take a turn or 2 to kill something. He just kind of stands around for you messing or duff up the big things if he has to. So it's definitely a good list. I've made a couple other alterations. I think the list I had from League was another good one. It dropped the anvilness and the tankiness of the Iron Jaws and added the clawback and the Brugit, because it was a list restriction, so I couldn't use the other. However, I found that list to be super duper good because the clawback just flies in, annihilates stuff, becomes a distraction, Carnifex. Everybody else can kind of get in a position and then pick everything apart, because he's either outright killing 1-2 things, or he's killing something and then leaving a bunch of things on low wounds. And then it lets the Monsta Killaz pick off things that are weak, and that's what they're really good at.
What this reminds me of is your classic destruction soup warband, where you have a bunch of different fighters, and each fighter has their own ability, and you've got different combinations of abilities that you can use. And being able to use the list effectively really means managing those abilities and using them when they need to be used, and using them in the most effective way. Because, like you said, your Neckslicers, your BrawlaBoy, your Klutcha-Grot, they're not going to last forever. Your Beastnob will eventually disappear. And then on top of that, you've got the Brute Boss with its own abilities. The only one there that isn't really being taken for abilities is the Boy Boss. You have a bunch of fighters with the abilities they bring to the table, and you're not really bringing anyone just as a guy to be there, just as models. You're bringing them because they're all useful at different points of the game. Even things like the BrawlaBoy with its situational triple, when you're using it, it's really good. And that's why you're bringing it. It just gives you a lot of options, and I can see how that can be very mentally taxing during a game, positioning your models where they'll be able to use those abilities to the best of their ability.
Yeah, that's the big thing you hit on there, right there, is everything has a purpose. I'm not a fan of playing stuff with chaff that are just chaff, like, here's my little dude, he's going on the point.
Just to be there.
It feels so, like, it's good, don't get me wrong, I'm not yucking that yum. That's your playstyle. That's your playstyle. For me, everything having a purpose makes me able to assess and combat a more variety of situations. Even the Klutcha-Grots, they mathematically suck, but what they do is more impactful on table and in practice than it is in theory, which is awesome. So, I mean, that's that. Yeah.
Yes, that is it. That is it from us for today. Hopefully you've got a bit of a better idea how you want to be building and playing your Kruleboyz Monsta Killaz. I think they're pretty good. I think they're a very balanced warband. I think that they can be very rewarding for you if you decide to put the time in and learn all of their interactions and go through their abilities and really build around those abilities and get those games in where you can use those to the best of how you can play. But for us, thank you very much for watching. As always, if you like what you see, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let us know in the comments down below what you think about the Monsta Killaz. If you've got any cool builds, any warband builds that you want to share, if you've got any cool allies that you want to put in, or anything else that's all about that faction, we are very happy to hear it. Thank you again. I've been Itan. This has been Rob. If you want to say goodbye.
Hey guys, take care. If you have any questions, ask me in the comments, or you can find me on Discord as Girth Demon.
Yep. Good stuff. And yes, we will see you next time.